Hello and a very warm welcome to the participants and speakers to the last day of the Rethinking Economics India Network annual event, Dialogues on Economic Realities. Thank you so much for joining us on Sunday. Started amidst the pandemic, the Rethinking Economics India Network has sought to create a space wherein multiple stakeholders like individuals, universities, the private and public sectors, and the society can participate in a scalable and collaborative effort to learn, teach, and discuss pathways for building a better economy for the society. Our annual event, Dialogues on Economic Realities, marks the culmination of delivering numerous focused deliberations and projects within the domain of heterodox and pluralist economics in India, bringing together a consortium of voices from local and international think tanks, youth-led organizations, academicians, and activists to ponder and brainstorm on ideas and solutions for reshaping our understanding and implementation of economic policies and theories. We started the event on 24th September with a session on the need for pluralism, and the days that followed, we covered pertinent themes of diversity and decolonizing, funding the new economy, global governance and the global south, and better economics for climate change. The theme for today is curriculum reform in economics, for which we have 3 sessions lined up, namely challenges for promoting pluralistic curriculum reforms, decolonizing curriculum workshop, and evolution of economics education. I would now like to give a brief on the work that we at Rethinking Economics India Network have been doing under this broad theme. We have a project titled Project Curriculum Review that aims to review the economics curriculum of Indian universities to build a foundation for further research into the strengths and limitations of the current economics curricula in India and how they might be reformed. We have a group of volunteers who are currently working on analyzing undergrad economics curriculum in some selected Indian universities on the various standards of plurality. The report is currently undergoing consultations, and we will be very happy to release it soon for everyone to read and comment on. Along with the report, we conducted a pilot survey in August 2021, an independent exercise to understand how the undergraduate students perceive the economics education imparted to them. The survey provides good support to our understanding and very well titled Challenges for Promoting Pluralistic Curriculum Reforms, which aims to discuss the different structural constraints in designing and incorporating more pluralism in the economics curriculum. It intends to understand the different structural pedagogies and alternative approaches that can be applied to economics education in India, and finally outlining the challenges in pluralism teaching due to national education policy to build room for a flexible education system in the universities of India. I will now welcome the speakers for today's session. Pulapre Balakrishnan. He has held appointments at Oxford University, ISI Delhi, IIM Kozhikode, and was the director of the Center for Development Studies at Trivandrum. Currently professor of economics at Ashoka University, Sonipat, he has for 3 decades by now intervened in the public debate on India's economy through his popular writing. He is also a recipient of the Malcolm Adisesha Award for Distinguished Contribution to Development Studies 2014. Our next speaker is Arjun Jayed. He's the Director, School of Arts and Sciences at Azim Premji University, where he teaches economics. He has previously taught at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. He's also a senior economist at the Institute for New Economic Thinking. His research combines quantitative and theoretical analysis of finance, development, political economy, and intellectual property. He has also been closely involved with the Core Economics Project. Our next speaker is Chirashri Dasgupta. She's an associate professor at the Center for the Study of Law and Governance at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Her research and teaching has been focused on different dimensions of the political economy of institutions, with the focus on patriarchy, race, caste, and class, and the role of law in the political economy of accumulation in trade, finance, and industrialization and public policy. The moderator and discussant for today's session is Divya Pradeep, Associate Professor of Economics at Christ deemed to be University, who has 19 years of teaching experience. Her teaching and research interests lie in the area of development studies, particularly gender, labor market, and livelihood studies. So now, without further ado, I will hand over the session to our moderator for the day, and really looking forward to all of you. Thank you so much.
Am I audible?
You are now.
Thank you, Samriddhi, for your introduction. And I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you for having me here to moderate this session. Really glad to share this space with our panelists and our audience. Before I open the discussion with our panelists, I would like to share a few opening remarks on why we need pluralism in economics curriculum. And hopefully this would set the stage for the remaining of the discussion today. So the call for pluralism in economics comes largely from the discontentment of students and faculty as well across the world over the dominance of a single paradigm, the neoclassical paradigm that promotes highly sophisticated mathematical models, but which are incapable of fully explaining the real world economic problems. And students now often complain that the curriculum has been narrowed down too much. There is hardly any intellectual diversity. And in fact, that is being compromised for the sake of achieving greater mathematical and analytical rigor in the discipline. So students are unable to, contend with some of the important challenges that face the 21st century, be it the climate crisis or the health crisis caused by the COVID-19 situation, or the migrant crisis, and many, many more. In fact, their discontentment has found expression in the establishment of several societies. Rethinking Economics India is one such society that promotes the cause of pluralistic thinking in economics. The financial crisis of 2008 in particular gave a lot of momentum to this pluralistic movement. And it kind of showed that, I mean, the crisis provided an opportunity to expose the false optimism, if I may say so, of economists who probably over-predicted, I mean, or rather over-relied on the predictive powers of their models and could not really see the crisis coming. And even during the current health crisis posed by COVID-19, we still do find a lot of methodological orthodoxy in the way we carry on with our analysis. And here I would like to borrow from a paper by Clive Spash, the former president of the European Society of Ecological Economics, where he brings out the very apparent conflict or tension that exists between loss of environmental protection and economic expansion. He talks about how there is a considerable reduction in material and energy usage, an improvement in air and water quality, and generally conditions are a lot more livable than before for both humans and non-humans alike. And yet we find that climate economists engage with very problematic theoretical abstractions, basing it on equilibrium prices and existence of perfectly competitive economies. So the cost or the damages of human-induced climate changes are being discounted with gains in economic expansion in the form of either increase in consumption goods or economic growth, whatever be that parameter that we are talking about. I think what is also very disconcerting is that the advice of the neoclassical economists have a lot of influence on policy making. So it's not like neoclassical economists are having their discourses only in their academic circles. They also seem to have a pervasive influence in the way they shape economic policy, the extent of government intervention, the role of regulations, and so on. And so in that sense, I think we are also, economists, as our other social scientists, we are also public intellectuals who seem to provide a certain viewpoint of our discipline, which sometimes tends to be very skewed. So even in the initial months of the pandemic, a very popular newspaper carried a feature by a economist from a very big university, where they were talking about how analysis of lockdowns need to be done. And there was a high-pitched call for a cost-benefit analysis using concepts of the value of a statistical life, which kind of talks about how much money people are willing to pay to lower the risk of death or to lower the probability of death. And the author further goes on to recommend using a quality of adjusted life years saved, which kind of again it conceals a lot of the ethical, moral, political aspects of the problem. And I think given these kinds of, narrow approaches to understanding economics, we should definitely be worried if this is what our students are going to be taking away from the classrooms. Clearly, they need alternative perspectives to such dominant thinking. They should be able to recognize that there are limits to mainstream economics, and they should be also able to understand that there are heterodox approaches in understanding economic phenomenon. It may not be possible for us to always analyze every issue with the lens of rationality. Reality itself is very multi-layered. There is no objective reality out there that you could just go and capture using your econometric models. It may not be possible to do that. For instance, how are we to make sense of the unpaid care work burden of women from the lens of rationality? Doing that would be negating the entire context in which choices are being made, the kind of power relations that exist between households, the dominance of patriarchy, and all intersectionalities that come up along with gender, such as caste and class and so on. So I think the need for pluralism is quite big and huge in front of us. And it's not just an ideological debate anymore. I don't think it's just something that academicians and like-minded students are discussing. It has very serious implications in the way in which economics education itself is carried out in the country. The admission policies of organizations. Just this morning, my daughter was telling me she wouldn't be able to apply to a very reputed private university in India because she had taken standard maths in her 10th standard, and standard maths is not allowed unless you've taken the complete math program, the regular math paper. You don't get a chance to apply. So it's almost as though mathematical reasoning and aptitude for economics is almost being equated with one another, which of course is kind of a little problematic. Also in the pedagogies that we use inside classroom, the assessments that we evolve, all of these things. So I think despite all these shortcomings, we continue to engage with very similar curriculums. And I'm not even sure whether there is actually enough consensus on the need for pluralism among faculty members in India. And how do we go about it? Are there some constraints, both institutional and structural, that impede the process of incorporating pluralism into our curriculum? So we will attempt to find answers to these and many other questions through our discussion today. So once again, I welcome the panelists, and my question is first to Professor Pulapre. Sir, do you think that curriculum development in our country is constrained by requirements of standardization by regulators, whether it's UGC or NAC accreditation processes, which leaves very little room to refine our curriculums, even when there is a clear need for it?
There are many things that I'm unhappy with about the UGC, in particular, it having imposed this evaluation schema called the API, which you're obviously familiar with, which I think the Academic Performance Index, which I think is crazy and doesn't help at all, either with teaching or with research. But frankly, when it comes to the development of the syllabus, I'm not sure UGC can be blamed that much, or the NAC process, whatever you might think of it. in my university where I teach, there is very substantial freedom. That hasn't necessarily resulted in a very plural or diverse economics curriculum, but there is freedom, and you can't blame the UGC for that. It has to do with the mindset, and maybe you might not think, or one might not think that this expression can be used in academics, but a form of majoritarianism also, right? The majority of people subscribe to a certain point of view, or the founders of a department did. Then they go out and hire people who think like them. So a short answer is, I don't think you can really blame the UGC and the NARC on this. They can be, they're perfectly blameworthy on many other things. I mean, as I said, it's mindset, and maybe university administrators also no longer being academics, vice chancellors, founders of universities, etc., are not academics in the sense that they were in the past, leave alone active academics. So they are not able to provide any kind of leadership on issues of curricula and pedagogy or whatever. So yeah, so I think it's really an internal problem. My view is that I'm not sure you can really blame the UGC for this.
Right. Sir, what about the number of, affiliated colleges to state universities? How much do these colleges, in what position are they to, how much do they say? Yeah.
Absolutely. But there again, it's not the UGC, Divya. It has to do with the guys in the University of Madras, what the Tamil Nadu colleges teach. You can't blame the UGC for it. You see what I mean? It has the Department of Economics at the University of Madras will decide what gets taught in the colleges. And you haven't said it, you're hinting at that. I think there should be substantial freedom given to. Somebody very nicely put it that a curriculum is rather like a map, rather than a detailed statement of what should be taught, a map about where the students should reach, what they should broadly know. So again, the UGC has very little to do with it, in my view. I just want to complete by saying also in India, there's also has been, I don't know how much of it there is now, a great reluctance towards autonomous colleges, etc., in the name of opposing elitism. I'm not so certain. I don't necessarily agree with that. If you don't allow any autonomy to college teachers, then they don't have any incentive either. You must give them far greater, and there are checks and balances, and a simple check, which again there's a lot of reluctance for acceptance in India, is just have student evaluation of courses, period, which are also made reasonably public within this system. That will do this. Once you have this, I don't think you should worry too much about giving greater autonomy towards to college teachers in the colleges of India. That's my view.
Right. Arjun, one of the arguments that has often come about regarding pluralism is that, and of course against pluralism, is that it allows for all types of analysis. It will allow for all types of analysis to be called economics. And, some kind of an anything goes scenario may emerge. Somewhere, I felt that implicit in that argument is a kind of a hegemonic struggle to show some kind of a demonstrable superiority of the discipline of economics over other social sciences, and not wanting to be identified just one among them. What exactly are economists so proud of, and what are they afraid of losing?
That's what you call a leading question, but I want to just back up a little, Divya, and think a little bit about what we want from an undergraduate curriculum first, right? I think that's the place to start with, rather than immediately diving into what has been, right? And in that sense, people here are clearly familiar and must know the old Keynesian idea of Keynes's idea of what a master economist is, and if I remember, he says something like, it must be he uses the word he, but in our current context, she would just be as appropriate. He must be a mathematician, historian, statesman, philosopher in some degree. He must understand symbols, speak in words, contemplate the particular in terms of the general. There's a whole host of things that is required for a master economist to be there, which is clearly not just mathematics or a particular sort of calculus. It's history. It's all kinds of things that are there. So anyone who says that economics shouldn't have multiple perspectives and so on is really going up against maybe the greatest certainly the greatest economist of the last century, maybe of all time, right? So in that sense, I think one should lay to rest the idea that one shouldn't have multiple perspectives. Now, having said that, I think there's a really important question for pedagogy, right? And I think it's very important for us to be very clear that what we should be teaching is for students to be able to understand, in some sense, the functioning of the economy. Samuelson had a lovely phrase in his first book, right? I think in 1948, and it's fantastic if you go back and actually read that book. He says, this book is written, I'm just looking this up, this book is written primarily as a textbook for those who will never take more than 1 or 2 semesters of economics, but are interested in the part of the subject as part of a general education. It aims at understanding economic institutions and problems of American civilization in the middle of the 20th century. I mean, look at that vision. In that sense, a person is talking about embedding an economics curriculum in a particular social context. What we've got right now is, I think, a lazy history. What we have done is that we've taken what was really, in some sense, given to us from the traditions of I would say broadly American and US education, what goes into an intro to micro, what goes into an intro to macro, and so on. And we're not really aiming to understand, in some sense, the central questions of our time. Once we have that as central as those kind of questions, then we can talk about whether something is confusing and not confusing. And the last thing I will say on this, I have a little bit of sympathy for people of the anything goes variety. And let me say about the critics of the anything goes variety. Let me say what I mean by that. I think learning economics takes a long time. It's not a subject which comes easily. It's a very worldly subject, and it requires people to go through a certain amount of training. And I'm not saying that the training has to be just of a particular sort, but I think it would be a mistake to assume that in the at least in undergraduate curricula, that you can teach everything and have it really embedded in the student going forward. One really has to think and pick and choose what it is. And my lodestar in that sense is really making them understand a particular economy and economic process. And that gives you a lot of freedom to choose and pick between various, if you will, paradigms. And I'll stop here. We can get into other things later.
Yeah, sure. Chirashri, in this whole discourse on pluralism that's kind of gathering so much of momentum, is there some kind of exclusion of many of the undergraduate colleges that are affiliated to state universities in some of these? Because are we even conscious that there is a need for pluralism, or is it just a conversation that is happening in very limited circles? And how are we to get across to the vast spectrum of college teachers who are there in this country, given that this is such a diverse educational setup?
Well, actually, there are two aspects to this. One is that, of course, the range of dissatisfaction with the way economics is taught, how it is sort of delivered, and how people learn it, the students learn it, is something very widespread. So you'll find it even in affiliated colleges in smaller towns and cities. But the thought on curriculum and how to really change it and the dialogues around it are sort of still around elite institutions and in networks which are largely non-inclusive of uh, these smaller colleges in the hinterlands, let us say, which are not part of the metropole of academic knowledge. The second aspect to this is that while I, to an extent, agree with Professor uh, Balakrishnan's argument that you can't blame the UGC, etc. But at the same time, increasingly we are moving towards a paradigm. So, for example, the choice-based credit system, which is being imposed everywhere, essentially the UGC has developed a core and an elective
Yeah.
structure for everybody to follow. They call it the minimum, but in most places that's the maximum. Now, and for institutions who are dependent on funding from the UGC, the pressure to adopt the CBCS is very high. So I don't think people in private universities really can feel the amount of political pressure and the way the political economy of education, higher education has progressed in this country in recent years, and with the new national education policy of 2020, we are increasingly moving towards more centralization and more of conformism in the
Mm.
syllabus rather than really sort of thinking in a wide way about pluralism.
Right, right. Since we are on the subject of NEP, is the NEP, at least in the document, keeps talking about providing greater flexibility and autonomy to higher educational institutions and allowing them to set their curriculums, decide their pedagogies and the resources and so on. And, it kind of gives and the emphasis on the word multidisciplinary education at the undergraduate level. So where do you think are the cracks? I mean, it's not very evident.
Yeah, it's very deceptive because it talks about constitutional values, it talks about liberty, it talks about autonomy. But the first crack is where it makes very explicitly talks, sort of places this hierarchy of research universities and teaching universities, two categories of universities. So,
Mhm.
one category of university where research and teaching will go simultaneously with a focus on research, and then all these affiliated colleges basically attached to large universities where there will be effectively no research. So creating, there is that existing hierarchy, but it actually codifies it. Okay, that's the first problem. The second is that it is not about the words that are spoken in the policy, but the question is that how will they finance this entire thing? And if you look at that, the proposal is to build they've already set up the higher education funding agency, which essentially will be giving loans instead of grants, or they'll be giving tied grants and loans. And many universities have already taken loans. For example, my university. And the second is, and they'll separate the functions. So HICI, the Higher Education Commission of India, is going to standardize, look after standards and qualifications and accreditation, which is all aimed at standardizing, a certain kind of standardizing, while HIFA will encourage industry university nexus. So private corporate funding and debt will be the mode of functioning of public universities. And so all of this will then create pressure on the curriculum to be conformist. And we are already seeing this, and there is a colleague from Delhi University who is a participant here. And recently, in fact, we saw this playing out in Delhi University, where on the question of the course of economic history, they only wanted to teach Tirthankar Roy and nothing else. And people had to really fight and push to bring in other perspectives. I mean, it is not that you don't teach Tirthankar Roy, but Tirthankar Roy is not the end all and be all of economic history, especially colonial economic history. So these kind of exercises are completely, it's political in the end. It is not that it is just a question of mindset and pedagogy. It's a question of how the overall education system is being designed in a particular way and pushed in a particular way to provide certain kinds of minds for the purpose of the economy and industry, and other kinds of development of knowledge and skill and mind, and different other kinds of mindsets and perspectives is clearly not desirable. Okay? So in that sense, it is the devil is in the detail of financing and not really the sort of deceptive prose of the policy, which anyway dedicates a very short portion to higher education. It's mainly about school education.
School education, right. Yeah. Arjun, since you were talking about, the kind of pedagogical, changes that would be required to promote a pluralistic curriculum, I was just thinking about the constraints of a typical semester system. You have roughly around 4 months time, and then we want a pluralistic curriculum. But is it actually doable? Because and is it kind of, is pluralistic perspective or theoretical diversity possible in every course in economics, or do you think that there are certain courses that kind of fit better into this format, and also there are some essential elements that could be good starting points from where to take it forward?
I think one, if you're talking about pluralism, one shouldn't be boxed into saying every course, all courses should have one Austrian perspective, one Marxist perspective, one Keynesian perspective. It doesn't work like that. Right? So I think it's quite clear that if we're talking about pluralism, we need to create it across the whole curriculum. We certainly need to make sure that for many of the core courses, that they're able to speak to larger concerns. And that's not always the case. They're very often aimed, it's quite odd because they're aimed very often in a sort of graded structure for people actually to go to graduate school. The intro course has the same ideas as the intermediate course, except the intermediate course often has it with more maths. And then the graduate level courses have it, again, the same ideas again at higher levels of maths. I would say that an overall curriculum, you could very easily, and I think it's important to have, for example, a compulsory Indian economy course. It's kind of tragic that many places have done away with that. An economic history course. These are by their nature some things which require certain other elements. You could certainly think of ways in which you have different sorts of intermediate and advanced courses which are, let's say, taking from one particular theoretical tradition more than another. You could think of political economy as a course. You could think of, if you're interested in Marxian economics, a particular course that you could take. And that's easy enough to do in a 3 to 4 year time frame. But certainly within each semester, if you're constraining yourself to trying to make sure that every perspective or even multiple perspectives are there rather than teaching the core of a particular perspective, that's a mistake, I think.
Right. Professor Pulapre, in this entire, attempt to build a pluralistic curriculum, textbooks, I assume, will play a very important role. And the most popular undergraduate economic textbooks tend to represent the dominant mainstream economic thinking, and which is often going very uncontested. Even now, if you check the the syllabi of economic programs, for instance, in microeconomics, Mankiv's textbooks are very popular, and even when new textbooks with a pluralistic essence arrive, there is some kind of a resistance in adopting these textbooks. Why do you think this is happening, and how could we deal with a problem like this?
I think it really has to do with the fact of the faculty being conservative, largely. I'll come back to that. Faculty not allowing for diversity is the main thing. I just want to say, Chirashri, if I may, made an interesting point about private universities. I just want to say, unfortunately, we are also bound by some of the recommendations of the NEP, and one of them is nonsensical business of exit at the end of year one. I'd really like to know what it means. I mean, frankly, I think it's completely irresponsible, and it's just like treating your students like your clients. So unfortunately, we are also, or even if you're in a private university in the country, you are bound in many ways by government regulations, UGC, and the proposals of the NEP. Except I just wanted to check with you the choice-based credit system. Is that the word? HCB, whatever.
CBCS, yeah.
Yeah, CBCS. That prescribes core and whatever, subsidiary or whatever. But does it also prescribe syllabus, curriculum? I didn't know that. I thought it just prescribed the structure of these undergraduate programs. Anyway, let me move. So I just want to say, in answer to you, Divya, you're going to have to, I'm sorry, repeat your question very briefly. I got
Sure.
distracted.
No problem. No, I was just asking about the role that textbooks would play in promoting.
Everything you say is absolutely true. I tend to teach macro rather than micro, and I do believe in case of Manque much more than in the case of Blanchard, which I teach, but also Blanchard, it is one perspective, and the use Blanchard, I mean, in many ways, is very elegant. Everything is derived, and there's quite a lot of data. It's actually a dream if you're not very critical about what you teach. Very easy to teach from, but it uses the idea of the natural rate of unemployment, which is highly problematic. I'm not very comfortable with it at all, to put it very mildly. And I, of course, express my dissent even as I teach it. So yeah, but I'm just trying to say, there is a way out of all this. You could teach, or a university or a department could teach Blanchard, but it should also make it a point to teach macroeconomics from what may be called broadly a post-Keynesian tradition. Yeah, if you wish. What are some of the names to make it easier for you to understand? Minsky, Knight, and Keynes himself, of course, on the terms of investment. So all of this is possible. I don't think, but I come back. I mean, the constraint is the faculty, at least in the university that I am familiar with. Also in the IIM where I teach, and in fact, I teach in an IIM, the Indian Institute of Management, Kozhikode, for half the year. I teach a course called the Economic History of Modern India. I don't teach Tirthankar Roy, and I think we're unfortunate if Tirthankar Roy is imposed on the students. The students read Utsa and Prabhat Patnaik, who are also my teachers, even though I don't necessarily agree with everything that I say. They read their most recent paper, forthcoming in monthly review. So there is a fair, maybe I'm very naive, but I think there is a fair deal of flexibility, except unfortunately, Divya, in these undergraduate colleges which you refer to, where I think a lot is shoved down their throats. And historically, it has come from the university departments. I studied in the University of Madras, it will come from Madras. Now, probably in some form, it does come from Delhi, the Ministry of Higher Education, you teach Arthashastra, etc. But historically, it hasn't come from there. And yeah, the undergraduate colleges of India, I worry about the constraints they face. But if you ask me, it's very easy to teach, alternative perspectives. It's not difficult. I just want to conclude by saying, I agree with Arjun fully, and I'm sorry to say that my own department doesn't have a compulsory course on the Indian economy. I teach an elective course, but does not have a compulsory course, and I think it's outrageous, really outrageous. But anyway, what they do have, and what I think should also be compulsory, and it's a nice way of bringing in alternative perspectives all into one course, is to have a course on the history of economic ideas, history of economic analysis, if you want to use Schumpeter's word. That's entirely doable, and by now there are quite a few inexpensive books. I don't see any reason why that shouldn't be made compulsory. But I'm just trying to say, if we want change, we should also lobby the guys who make these curriculum decisions. I mean, we also have to push with our universities. Universities have to push with the ministries. I don't know, but that's the way it works. But also, in answer to a question, in a 3-year course, it's not impossible at all to teach alternative perspectives at all. Even without a compulsory, ideally you should have it compulsory history, economic thought. You can have a whole elective on post-Keynesian economics, or you can have a compulsory in post-Keynesian economics. Of course, if the university that sets the syllabus allows that. So all this, the 3 years is not a constraint. Let me make that very clear. And textbooks are now available. They're inexpensive. Material is mostly available free on the net. So all of this is much easier to do than it was when I was an undergraduate 40 years ago. At least the accessibility to the material.
Right. Chirashri, on the question of, lack of freedom for undergraduate colleges that are affiliated to state universities, NEP envisages doing away with affiliation system by 2035 in a very phased manner. Do you think that this will at least free up some space or is there something that we are again missing out here? Of course, there is the fear of, losing the local, the provincial requirements, the state level requirements, but then at least some freedom to set the syllabus. So if we are able to create the consciousness of the need for pluralism among faculty members, then it should get translated ultimately into a good curriculum, a holistic curriculum.
Well, there are three things I think which need to be kept in mind when we discuss this. The first is that with this phasing out and with these small colleges with hardly like uh, one or two members in the faculty teaching an entire discipline, that's the state of these colleges. And unless these are financed well, and not made even more dependent on debt, which seems to be the way forward at the moment, these colleges will simply die. They will not survive this till 2035, this phasing out. Okay, it's because they're part of a larger institution that in some ways they are able to survive. The second thing is that the hiring policies, yeah, is something that defines, as Professor Balakrishnan has been saying, that it is the faculty who essentially, but there is an institutional aspect to it as well. Our experience in Ambedkar University was when it was first started, when the curriculum was started, and I used to teach there before I came to JNU, and uh, it was a very thought out, very well thought out hiring process in which, and then we were told to create the syllabi and the curriculum, and essentially it was a very pluralist curriculum. But then people started leaving, and once people started leaving, there was no institutional effort to fill up the gaps in a way where the curriculum can be institutionalized. So the curriculum has changed today because the faculty has
True,
changed
true.
today. So this institutionalization of the curriculum is very, very important, whether it is a small college or a large university or a very well-known place, a very well-funded place. It's the same thing, that as long as there's no institutionalization of a pluralist curriculum, which entirely depends on the administration and not the faculty themselves, the hiring process. And this we have seen an erosion both in state universities and central universities once again in recent times, where you know that political and ideological considerations have been um, driving the hiring process in the last few years, rather than sort of qualifications and like work, publications, etc. So, in that sense, I feel that this model that is being proposed of disaffiliating the colleges and making them standalone institutions is actually going to mean that we will have less colleges. And this is absolutely in keeping with the policy's aim, because no, they no longer talk about access and equity. Instead, they talk about quality. So, this move to quality is also in a some way a move towards exclusion, and the doing away of the affiliation system over time is actually going to sort of reinforce this uh, inequity and the lack of access.
Right, right. Professor Pulapre, given the educational diversity, the setup of our educational system, like I was mentioning earlier, and I think Chirashri was also talking along very similar lines. The starting points are not going to be the same for everybody, especially when it comes to our exposure and experiences with curriculum design and development. They will tend to vary greatly. How important are faculty development programs or education programs in bridging some of these gaps? And how can we build, especially when we are all at different levels? There are private universities, there are autonomous colleges, there are affiliated colleges to state universities, there are central universities, all at different starting points. When we talk about bringing in big curricular reforms, how can we build valuable networks of collaboration? How do you see that happening?
That's a very good question. Once you have networks, in some ways you can override some of these constraints, right? We are all going to be talking to one another on one platform. irrespective of where we are. So from that point of view, the formation of network is the answer to that. And it's not staggeringly difficult now that you have information technology to do that, right? The question is the initiative, and one would have hoped that a body like the Indian Economic Association would do this, right? And once you have that, a great deal can be done, exactly like we're talking, we talk every 3 months, all the economics teachers of India talk to each other in 3 months, you can do a hell of a lot, what I'm trying to say? I mean, so I think you put your finger on it when you say networks. Now, who will initiate it? Maybe rethinking India, Divya, if you're a player in this, I mean, it's entirely a worthwhile thing to do. Now, you mentioned something about faculty development program and something else. What was that?
Teacher education and faculty development.
Right.
I mean,
they're always very helpful. But let me just tell you the history of this in India, independent curriculum reform with UGC puts up these methodology courses and professional, what are methodology courses to which teachers go somewhere and spend. I don't think that helps. And I'm sorry to say, it's such a waste of money. So in some ways, there must be motivation among faculty to, check out, what is happening in the world. If you don't have that motivation, there are limits to what can be achieved. But having said that, once again, the networks that you suggest is a fantastic idea. It's inexpensive and will just cut through the initial endowments. It doesn't matter where you are, private, public, a small town, metro, it makes no difference. We're all in this together, and it would be a lovely thing to do. I wish the Indian Economic Association would do something like this. It's possible, but it can be done even by this wonderful group, whoever they are. I've just been getting emails from them. I haven't met any of them individually. It can be done. They can do it. But I think that's the way. These courses, to me, I'm a little skeptical about it. It's not as if you shouldn't have them. I mean, you can have them. But networks will probably help very much. I just come back to one thing, if I might say so. The best international books, and if you're not teaching from texts, if you're teaching from papers, is available now at very low prices in India in relation to the salary of a government teacher, government college teacher. These are completely affordable, and accessible and available in a way they were not 40 years ago. In some ways, therefore, if there is some initiative, at least to get an idea of what is being taught, the best universities in the world, or leading universities, I don't want to say best, have their course content on their websites. You don't have to follow them if you think you don't think it's great. But if you think you're interested in following them, these textbooks, there are Indian editions of these textbooks. They're inexpensive. You can go and buy them. So I just want to say, that I don't see as a constraint. The starting point is not a constraint. Of course, the attitude of the administration, mindsets, freedom, that is an issue. I can imagine. But I would think that the faculty as a whole, anyway, anywhere, has some freedom, in my view, under the system itself. I believe.
Right. Arjun, how are we to address, and this is now bringing in research as an exercise, which we ourselves engage with as faculty members and what we take to our classrooms. How do we address the issue of academic power that is related to publications, for instance? It's quite likely that we take to our classrooms what we read and write ourselves. And when we try to engage in non-modeling approaches that might use some form of a historical analysis or qualitative research, it may not find favor with economics journals. And therefore, a lot of painstaking field work or the kind of in-depth narrative inquiries are usually rejected in favor of, some mind-numbing secondary data-based econometric analysis. Not that it is in any way inferior, but I'm just saying there's too much of emphasis on that. If we don't expect our own research work to be methodologically pluralistic, what is it that we are taking as our experiences inside the classrooms?
I, that's a very good question, Divya, and I think there's many things in that. Right, I feel like one needs to unpack that. It seems clear to me that for most people, at least in our context, it's not like most places here have the American system where there's tenure and all of those things. So that publications, in some sense, are not essential for your ability to teach. So in that sense, I think that is a freedom that remains currently in India. How long that will remain, it's unclear to me. It really depends on how we go. That gives you the freedom, I think, to actually bring in, to whatever extent you can, perspectives which you think are genuinely valuable in terms of um, pedagogy, if you will. If you think, for example, you talked about unpaid care, right? I mean, one could use a time use survey kind of analysis, or you could just use a much more, anthropological or other kinds of, philosophical approaches as well to try to understand that particular field. So I would say that one shouldn't overemphasize the fact that one needs to research with what one can actually teach in the classroom. The larger question that you ask about whether research and whether research pluralism is something that should be supported, and the answer to me would be obviously yes. But I think that there is the thing that we are facing is clearly a field which is far more interested in particular ways of approaching the world, right? Especially if you're going to try to publish in quote unquote reputed journals abroad. Especially from India, the kind of things that most people are most interested in is whether you have got your identification correct, rather than whether the question itself is extremely important. Now, of course, there are some exceptions, but that's part of the if you will, the current discipline of economics. And I don't think we can do too much about that. I would say for if there are young faculty here who are interested in pluralism more generally, you must do your pluralist research. You must do your alternative research, because that's what keeps you alive. And actually, that's what keeps the field alive. You cannot, if you're not doing that, then in some sense, my analogy is with cooking, right? If you think of pluralism as a buffet where you can pick this, pick that, you get a miserable meal. But if you have a really good meal that you can cook because you actually understand the ingredients and that culture, it's a very different sort of experience. So I would say that our freedom is still there, that we can keep to what we would like to hold to as a research agenda, and function in the classroom as well. I don't think we're at the stage yet where these are at loggerheads.
Right. Okay. Chirashri, this is a question about the importance of student diversity when we are trying to promote a pluralistic curricula, because that's a aspect that is less discussed, in the plurality context. And however, it's an important one, because I think the ability to appreciate varied modes of thinking or problematizing is often located in one's own life experiences and one's own surroundings. So the greater the diversity in backgrounds that you come from, be it the region, caste, class, gender, differential backgrounds, they're likely to play a very important role. Where do you see NEP on this? What has been the, are there any specific takeaway points from the NEP which seem to give a lot of representation to these underrepresented groups?
Well, if you look at university classrooms in terms of diversity, on one hand, in terms of the implementation of the affirmative action uh, uh, provisions that we have in terms of reservation, that compliance has gone up in the last 20 years or so. But on the other hand, what we find is that that does not mean that the classroom has become diversified. And the reason being that the problem doesn't start at the level of higher education. The dropouts levels, if you see, of the underrepresented groups in the sort of primary and the middle school level. So only 3% of all students who enroll in primary education in India make it to the university. And this we have to remember, and obviously the dropout rates are more in terms of, for example, among Dalits and Adivasis, among women dropouts are more than men. And though that has slightly changed in recent years, it's a more complex story now. And what and so the implementation of various kinds of policies only at the point of entry of the higher education system does not address the real reason for the lack of diversity. And in that sense, I don't think if you look at the national education policy, it's the part on school education, it doesn't address this question adequately at all. So in that sense, it does nothing to really bring in that kind of plurality in the classroom, that kind of diversity in the classroom, which would really then lead to different kind of questioning minds.
Right, right. Is there a possibility of more dropouts than before, especially for students coming from marginalized background with these multiple exit options being given? And also, it kind of creates so much of uncertainty when to introduce pluralism in the very first year, or, as you go by, when would be those subjects which have a more pluralistic appeal come in? These multiple, entry exit options are also going to create some uncertainties on that front. What's your take?
Absolutely. But also, this multiple exit thing is a way to really cover up the mm, increasing percentage of dropouts. So you say they've exited instead of saying they have dropped out. That's what is going to happen. Take it from me.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and there's no guarantee that they would ever come back. The idea
Yeah.
is to bring them back later at any point of time without having to repeat the whole thing. But then they may be never coming back at all. Yeah,
See, this doesn't work. I taught in the British further education system for many years. And one of the things that I noticed is even though there is a lot of institutional support to bring back people, there is a retention is a problem. Like when you bring them back after 5 or 6 years, they've forgotten everything. So they do need to repeat everything to be able to come up to the level where they can then move forward. So it's not an easy proposition to say that you leave today and you come back after 6 years and we will see.
right, right. Arjun, coming back to classroom again, uh, especially in the design of our assessments, is there is is it going to change because we adopt a more pluralistic criteria? Because you come from that particular space where a lot of these experiments have happened, and how different would a pluralistic curriculum in economics be done inside classrooms, both in terms of pedagogy as well as in terms of assessments? What the evaluation criteria particularly, does it change when we try to move across other theoretical approaches?
Are you
It's an
asking me or
interesting.
who are you asking?
I was asking Arjun.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Divya, I actually don't think there's a very strong relationship between, particular tradition and the pedagogies which people are used to teach it. I know some teachers who are teaching extremely mainstream work who do it through extraordinarily creative ways. Classroom experiments, different sorts of scaffolded assessments, and so on. And I know people who have taught structuralist courses or post-Keynesian courses with a midterm and a final, which is basically mathematical. So I don't think those two are really, strongly related in that sense. I think that in general, we should be thinking of, when we talk about the word pluralism, we should be thinking about different ways of learning, and so have different sorts of assessment strategies, but that really doesn't map on directly to, if you will, a methodology or a particular school, as it were, of economics.
Right. Professor Pulapre, and I think this would be the final question as part of today's discussion, and then I'll probably have some closing statements from all of you. But before that, Professor Pulapre, my final question to you is about what economist Edward Lazier, said in his paper in his defense of economic imperialism. And to quote him, he says, "It is for this reason that the broader thinking sociologists, anthropologists, and perhaps psychologists may be better at identifying issues, but worse at providing answers." And he contends that economics is the way it is because it is analytically rigorous, and it is to provide a narrow focus to the researcher. What would be your take on this kind of a statement? Do you think we should? Sorry, please go ahead.
Please finish. Do I think? Please finish.
No, so my question was, are economists known to find solutions to problems which are identified by others? Is this kind of a compartmentalization of disciplines even making much sense, all coming from the field of social sciences?
Well, thank you, Divya, very much for this question, and even more for quoting Lazier. I wasn't aware of this. In fact, this very issue was in the very small preparation I had made about what I want to say in this session. But instead, we've had this wonderful interactive mode. I basically disagree completely with this. Also with the hierarchization, is that correct? Or making hierarchies of the different subjects in the social sciences. I think this is absurd. In fact, economics should be taught as part of the social sciences, along with political science and sociology. And not even political economy will do, because political economy is still very heavily economistic in its underpinnings. I think, and I'll tell you, rather than just being some kind of political correctness, I'll tell you why I think it is. It is so. If you look at India in terms of human development, which is what we should be looking at very, very seriously in this 75th year, instead of either worrying about the size of the economy in 2025 or what more to ask in the censuses, we should be worried about human development. That is what was broadly promised to the people of this country in 1947, right? Irrespective of your identity, we should be worrying about it. If you look at India, you find a pattern where the levels of human development are much higher in the south and the west, right? The east, of course, should not be seen as a whole. Northeastern India has very high levels of human development, and that is really the interesting thing to explain. Now, you cannot explain this purely in terms of economics or political democracy. After all, the laws are the same over the country. The explanation is very simply provided by the social structure and the degree of social transformation that has happened in different parts of the world. And southern India has seen much greater social transformation. Not all of them very good necessarily. Some of it unnecessarily divisive, if you ask me. But on balance has led to the empowerment of the people at the bottom of the heap. Unless you have social transformation, you can't do that. So purely economistic approaches, i.e., let's have a lot of public sector, or let's have macroeconomic stability, that's the other lot, right? It just misses the point completely. You can do this only through a approach which combines economics, sociology, and political science. And psychology is hugely important also. I mean, how do you break out of the patriarchal mindset? I think surely psychology is very important there. You can't just say that it has to do with, the base or economics or property relations. Is independent of that. So yeah, I disagree completely with Lazier, and I'm very happy you raised this. And it's a great point. And yeah, the quote, I'll chase it up now in the net. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we have some questions. Can we have some closing remarks or statements if you would like to make on the subject of or on the challenges of promoting a pluralistic economic curriculum? Chirashree, would you like to give your closing statement.
Okay, just a couple of points. One is that economics, because of its very history, is not just any other disciplines. Talking about hierarchies, it's very closely connected to the functioning of capitalism. And essentially, the how the history of capitalism and the history of economics is very closely related in that sense. The paths it has taken, who has been hegemonic when, etc., what kind of theories have been taught, etc. So one of the really important ways in which uh, the curriculum needs to be thought about, and there is to sort of have a, it's not just about history of economic ideas or the history of economic thought, or uh, the way economic history is taught, but to juxtapose these two together. That would show that how much of the correspondence between the sort of the knowledge content of economics, the discourse in economics, and the what has the real world events which has shaped it, how far they are related. And this is something that I think is missing in the current engagement with pluralism. Okay. And this is something I think that needs to be brought into the conversation in some way or the other. The second thing that I want to say is that when we talk about pluralism, we often talk about it in a way where the discipline not uh, is not sort of uh, is in the abstract. The discipline is in our heads, the discipline is in the journals, the discipline is in the research that we do, but it is removed from the institutional contexts, and those contexts are widely varying in which economics is taught. So, to make generalized statements either about faculty or about administrations or about students, it's completely it's impossible, and we shouldn't tread down that
Attempt.
path, because in the name of pluralist economics we should not be setting up just an alternate standardized kind of curriculum, that the local context in which economics is being taught has to be kept in mind. And at one hand it is uh, easy enough to say it's the faculty, but you see, when you are running a department with just one or two faculty members teaching 10 courses or 12 courses over 3 years, you don't think about the syllabus. You just do how they do it. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to survive that context. But that is the reality of higher education in India, not the elite institutions we are sitting in. We are a minuscule part of that reality. And so,
Absolutely.
unless we bring that reality on board in the discussion on pluralism, I think we won't progress much. Thank you.
The
Thank you.
last,
Thank
so
you.
sorry. So
Yeah, Arjun, please go ahead.
yeah, I just want to, say one very quick thing that I feel like many of these sessions end up doing, which I hope the students who are here don't take away, which is to say that the reason I'm an economist is because I think economics is actually a really powerful and important discipline. I wouldn't want to, downplay it and say that, there's nothing that, we have this tendency often to deride economics because we have some criticism about particular parts of economics. But I strongly feel like as a tool of analysis, a way of thinking, the old Keynes's ideas and thoughts about what an economist should be, I think those are an extremely powerful set of ways about analyzing a very complex world around us. And we really should not in any way downplay the kind of success we've had in many of these things, from Malthus onwards, if you will. There are many economic analyses which are very powerful, very succinct, and help us get a grip on a very complex social reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with Arjun. I don't think our students should take any of these critical conversations as a way of, thinking any less about the discipline that they have chosen and that they are a part of. As a, like Arjun rightly mentioned, as a tool of analysis, as a way of thinking, it has evolved very well, and we are just making these conversations to bring about more improvements in the way we go about thinking about economics. Pulapre sir, would you like to give your closing statements?
Briefly, Divya, you've given me a lot of opportunities. So I'll be very brief on the need to make inject diversity and pluralism into the curricula of economics in India. There cannot be two ways. There's a huge need to do that. But I wouldn't exaggerate the constraints. I think this is quite easy to do this. Sorry, it's a materialist argument, but resources, all this is very easily available to us. So somewhere it is a matter of whether those who teach or run universities, how they want to see this. That is the constraint, really. But by and large, this is doable. But we're very far from the ideal. There is a great need to teach a diversity of models, a diversity of modes of reasoning. What Arjun referred to in Keynes's statement: mathematics, history, philosophy, right? And also content. Economics should be part of social sciences. But I think this awareness should be brought to the fore. The constraints, I wouldn't exaggerate.
True, that would definitely be a good beginning, and to be aware and to be conscious of what is needed as improvements, and then work on the constraints alongside. Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Pulapre. We have some questions from the audience here. Samriddhi, would you like me to take them, or should I hand over the session to you? I'm not able to see all the questions, though. There's just one that I could see here. Is that all that we have?
Yes, that's all that we have. You can go ahead with taking the question and answers.
Okay, all right. So the question is from Joshi KJ, and he's asking, do you think our students who choose to continue higher studies abroad face serious challenges in terms of adapting to the interdisciplinary approach? If yes, what is the solution you could give in terms of curriculum change? Professor Joshi, whom is this question addressed to?
May I just say something?
Yes,
there are
ma'am.
more than 7 questions.
How is
I can
it that
see more than 7 questions. It starts with
yes, in the question and answer tab, Divya, I think that's...
Oh, yes. Okay. I think I was looking largely at the chat box. Okay. Yes. There are quite some number of questions. So maybe we can begin by answering this question from Dr. Joshi. Would any one of you like to address this question?
Okay, I will. I don't think it's a real constraint. I mean, one of the advantages or disadvantages, if you will, of economics education is that it's pretty standard. Manque is taught in Argentina, it's taught in India, and it's taught in Indonesia. So the disadvantages that we take is probably the same as the disadvantages that most other international students take. It is certainly true that some, let's say in the metropolitan centers of universities, let's say the UK and the US, they probably have much more freedom in some of the ways that they've developed their curricula. But I don't think Indian students really face much of a struggle in terms of their competitiveness on these grounds. And in fact, if anything, I don't think this is, what the problem is often in economics degrees insufficient for getting into many PhD programs if you haven't done a lot of maths. That's where I think the constraints are, not anything else.
Right.
Divya, may I make a comment?
Yes,
please?
Yes,
yeah,
please.
Okay. Joshi, you raised just a question which I'd like to answer in a light-hearted way. I hope you don't think it's flippant. Hey, what problems do Indians face? You put them in a foreign university and they flower. We should seriously be wondering whether we are doing something wrong. I mean, can you give me an example of an Indian who hasn't done well in economics? I'm being lighthearted here, but I'm just trying to say I see no real barriers to doing well in overseas universities. Of course, that I don't think should be the goal of our teaching economics in India either, that they should be doing well overseas. But your concern is, I don't think it's a reasonable concern. Most Indians do exceptionally well when they go abroad. At the same time, I'm not sure if it's so interdisciplinary either in the mainstream economics departments. I wish it was in the West. I mean, so you talk about interdisciplinarity. I'm not sure if it's so interdisciplinary in the West. I mean, they teach a wider range of subjects because within economics, because the best departments are very large and they can teach a wide range. Is it very interdisciplinary, more interdisciplinary than it is in India? I'm not entirely certain. Thank you, Divya.
Thank you. There's a question from Arijit. Students usually restrict their thoughts and perspectives within the curriculum defined by education bodies, since most of them are driven by marks and exams. Sometimes few teachers are also not aware of how to handle diverse perspectives of students. Should things start with educational departments training the teachers on how to encourage free thought and discussion in the classroom, and how to channelize these classroom discourses into some tangible learning? Not really mentioned. Chirashri, would you like to take that question?
Sorry, my audio went off for some time. I didn't hear the question. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, sure. Students usually restrict their thoughts and perspectives within the curriculum defined by education bodies, since most of them are driven by marks and exams. Sometimes few teachers are also not aware of how to handle these diverse perspectives of students. So should things start with educational departments training the teachers on how to encourage free thought and discussion in the classroom, and how to channelize these classroom discourses into some tangible learning?
Okay, I had a teacher who used to say that all my students are Marxists, but spelled with a KS. So, in that sense, I agree that in the end, the way our education system is defined and the way the job market is, in the end, it is about scores. And so it is not so much about the engagement, but the scores. But at the same time, teaching now for more than 20 years in the Indian education system, what I find is that if there is sufficient food for thought for students, especially at the undergraduate level, when the minds are still not totally made up, when there is a certain openness with which students come to the classroom, it is possible to engage them in ways in which they emerge not only as people who get good scores, but also sort of are thoughtful, sensitive, who emerge as thoughtful, sensitive citizens in a certain sense. So I don't think the two are at sort of cross purposes always. It is about the classroom environment and the democracy of the classroom and how much of dialogue and interaction is facilitated. Now, whether teachers can be trained to do this, I I don't think this requires formal training. It is something that evolves with experience. Because in India, even people who normally enter the system as teachers enter at a very young age. Now they just finish their PhDs and then enter, but earlier it used to be they just finished their MA and then entered. So they were almost interacting with people their own age, and that created a certain kind of nervousness and also a need to control the classroom in a certain way. But with age as an experience, as you progress slowly, the it is kind of tacit knowledge that you develop in terms of how to handle the classroom. But what can be done institutionally is to facilitate a variety of pedagogic methods instead of just lecture based classes. If that can be institutionally built in into the curriculum design, that goes a long way in terms of addressing this issue that you've raised.
Thank you, Chirashri. The next question is, do you think universities like DU have a hegemony in dictating curriculum design for other universities as well from private elite ones? I think that's a very valid question because there is a tendency to refer to DU syllabus most of the times to decide what kind of a curriculum one should set. What would be your take, Chirashri?
Well, yes and no, because it is true that for a long time the due syllabus became like a standard to which people refer to see their own, to design their own syllabus. But that's mostly concentrated in some parts of India, not everywhere, because many of the state universities for a long time have had their own ways of curriculum designing, and which is very different from the due syllabus. So, for example, the university that I went to, Jadavpur University, was very different from the due syllabus of the time that I'm speaking of, which is a good 30 years ago. But the one thing that has happened is that if you want a pluralist curriculum, the due syllabus is the last place you should be going to today, given that the curriculum in DU has been completely botched in the last 20 years or so, uh, uh, in terms of getting rid of anything that was pluralist in the core courses, doing away with most of the electives which would bring in some kind of pluralism, and restricting it to become a very standard neoclassical training. Yeah. And so today, if people are looking to design something different, then of course the due syllabus is not the place where we should start from. Yeah. And so, and I think that's slowly building up. In fact, in Ambedkar University, when the syllabus was designed, the curriculum was designed, and our feeder was like all our MA students were coming from DU, and all our undergraduate students were students who had not got into DU, good colleges in DU. Yeah, so it was the rejected lot from DU who were coming to us. So their expectation was that it would be some kind of a, they would get a taste of DU in Ambedkar. But it was a very conscious design to make the curriculum significantly different in terms of pluralism. So even within Delhi, there are these attempts to really break away from the hegemony of DU and look at other ways of designing curriculum. And so I think it's a process which will continue in the coming years as more and more people start to think about the effectiveness of the economics teaching that is going on in terms of a standard neoclassical curriculum, its limitations.
Thank you. Do other factors such as research funding, UGC funding, faculty hiring, degree formulation influence the structure of the curriculum? If yes, how? It's from one of the attendees of today's program. Pulapre sir or Arjun, any of you could probably.
Yeah. When curricula is or curricula are left to the department concerned, which I think is in principle a good thing, though you can never be sure, then hiring does make a difference. If departments are captured, and this is a great reality, then the present set of faculty who matter will go out and hire exactly whom they want, right? And it works both ways. I mean, you could get people from either end of the spectrum, right? So, of course, hiring does make a difference. So there is nothing will work but a commitment either required by the institution as a whole, say the university, or the set of people in the department, a commitment, as I said, to a plural approach. If there isn't a commitment to a plural approach and all hiring is done in a faculty, then the faculty will go out and hire existing faculty will go out and hire exactly the same kind of people as them. So the answer quite simply is that the hiring processes matter, but I come back again, I think UGC was mentioned. I'm not sure UGC stands in the way of pluralism. They stand in the way of many things, creativity for a start, and they, what's the right word, tie down the faculty in this country in a most unreasonable way. But curriculum, I'm not entirely certain.
Okay, thank you, sir. There's one more question about, I'm assuming it's a student. How do students that have no entry or any idea about alternative perspectives realize the benefits of pluralism over mainstream economics? I think the question is, where does one start if one has no idea about this? I'm assuming that it's that if they do not have I mean, it must be before their whole exposure to other heterodox approaches. What would be a good starting point? I'm not very
Shall I take it?
sure, but
Okay. So one thing is, when students come into the undergraduate curriculum, they don't know anything of anything. So they neither know mainstream economics in a way that they can make a judgment about it, nor do they know any other ways of doing economics. So I don't think it is a disadvantage. It does become a slight challenge when they've done a very mainstream undergraduate degree and then join a postgraduate pluralist economics curriculum. In those cases, what my experience says is that students don't it is a process of unlearning that happens through the 2 years of the master's curriculum. Doesn't mean that they always think that pluralist traditions are better. Many of them may go on to still retain their neoclassical convictions, but on the it at least ensures that all of them have had an exposure to thinking about the discipline differently, that the discipline is not just one perspective, that it brings in different perspectives, and then they make the choice. It's not that everyone is we are trying to sort of, this is not like we are not proselytizing here, or we are not trying to convert people to any one school of thought, right? It is more about giving a sort of a feel of the discipline as being much wider than what it is commonly perceived as. That I don't think creates much of a conflict in a student's mind.
right. I think this is the last question, and we are almost.
Professor Balakrishnan wanted to add something.
Yeah, please, sir.
Divya, is there time? Can you take it?
No, yeah, you can take it. We have a couple of minutes. Samruddhi, is that fine?
I'll be very brief. I mean,
yes.
Since you asked this question and came from the students, I just want to say, I don't want to insist that this is the right way to do it, but just to give you an idea, in the very first semester that students come into Ashoka, they are offered a course. In fact, all students, not just the economic students, a course. I teach it and I designed it. Nobody has had a say in how I should design it, whether I should have the Arthashastra or anything else in it, or even Marx, though I teach Marx. It's called Economic Ideas from Smith to Sen, and students read original papers of about 17 thinkers in economics. I just want to say, this is one approach one could take. And it's worked reasonably well. I would think students are reasonably happy that they're exposed to a range of ideas early on. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Just one final question. Rather than having a strict syllabus for all colleges across India, should colleges have a localized syllabus and curriculum catering to the immediate issues around them? Arjun, would you like to answer that question?
So, I'm still old-fashioned enough to think that there is an importance of having some broad principles that everyone should know, right? So to the extent, but I do think, for example, the notion of inelasticity or a multiplier or all the kind of analytical categories that we come up with in the first, 2-3 years, incidence of tax, all of those are more universal than then at least in these kind of fora we like to say. I think there are certain things that are well-earned knowledges that everyone should know. Should people have local context? Yes, certainly. I think it would be wonderful if you had in Karnataka an understanding of let's say social development in Karnataka. I think it's really important, and as we become it's a continent after all. We are having some sort of knowledge of our local context would be wonderful. Whether we can achieve that best by ensuring a particular localized kind of syllabus? I'm not sure.
Thank you, Arjun. I think it's almost time now, and I will hand it over back to the organizers. Samriddhi, over to you. Thank you so much to all the panelists. This has been a very lively and engaging discussion, and I'm sure we could go on, but then I think they have another session to follow up. So yeah. Samriddhi, over to you.
Thank you so much for such an engaging session. I personally learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience also did the same. And thank you very much for your inspiring work in the area of promoting pluralism in the economics curriculum. In your own ways, all equally very crucial. We hope to take the theme forward by expanding on various sub-themes in the coming future that will add value to the project as well at Rethinking Economics India Network. So we have 2 more sessions lined up for the day: Decolonizing Economics Curriculum Workshop, facilitated by DECON at 5 p.m. IST, and a fireside chat on evolution of economics education in India at 7:30 p.m. IST between Sanjay Reddy and Rahul Dey. Thank you so much once again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Divya.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.